Wojciech, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
My pleasure. Good evening.
Good evening to you. So what's going on? I mean, as I said in the introduction, we hear about hacking all over the place. Yes, government departments, elections, commercial enterprises, and so on. Draw us a big picture of why this has become such a huge problem over the last, 5 years?
Slightly more than that, I'd say 10, maybe 15 years. Well, the issue is that we've moved so much of our lives, so much of our data to the digital sphere, that right now that is where the treasures are. That is where everything that both the intelligence agencies and the cyber criminals want, need, and look for can be found. That is why we see so many attempts by both government actors and non-government actors to access our data, simply because that data is so valuable from both a financial and criminal standpoint and a strategic geopolitical standpoint even. That is where the crown jewels are, so to speak, of almost every government, every company in the world.
Right, okay. So, I mean, let's break this up a little bit and differentiate between the corporate hacking and the government hacking. Starting with corporate, how successful generally is this hacking? I mean, what do these hackers do, and how successful are they at extorting money from their victims?
Well, I have to say that unfortunately they're extremely successful. The actual data is pretty hard to come by because people who pay ransoms for the data rarely admit to doing so. But it's pretty safe to assume that every year hundreds of millions of dollars in ransoms are paid to hackers who either steal company data or use ransomware to lock company systems. We've had some massive incidents like the NotPetya ransomware from, I believe that was 2018, that caused billions of dollars of damage around the world. And I mean, to a lot of companies, it seems like a logical and business savvy approach to the problem to just pay off whoever's stealing their data instead of revealing that they have been hacked. It's both a reputational problem. I mean, nobody wants to know that the company they've given the data over to hasn't been actually doing a very good job keeping it safe. And it's a problem from a pure business perspective, because if like 80% of computers in your organization are locked because of a ransomware attack, well, you're not gonna be able to do much business. You can use backups, you can use outside contractors to try to restore your networks to their original capability, but that takes time, and time is money. So a lot of those hackers, a lot of those criminal groups simply use the fact that it's more convenient to many companies to pay them off than it is to actually secure the data, secure their systems.
Understood. Okay, well, talking about corporate data, I mean, more and more of it's actually being held now on the cloud, yes, by various organizations who specialize in this service. How secure is the cloud?
Well, you have to remember there's this saying that, there's no such thing as the cloud. The cloud is just somebody else's computer. So it really depends on what organization we're talking about. Most of the big players, most of the giants of the online sphere, well, their reputation is online, so they will take as good care of their clients' data as possible, simply because if they lose it, if they are attacked, if they are hacked, well, that's that for that line of business. Problems begin when you see smaller operators, because then they might not have the resources needed to stop some of the bigger attacks we've seen. But in either case, it's always best to keep your most vital data where you can see it, so to speak, to remember to do the most important backups of your organization's data, of your own private data, on media that you have direct access to, because the cloud is fine, the cloud is great, but in some cases the cloud can become a major problem for everyone.
Right. Okay. Well, on that happy note, let's move now to the political sphere. As I say, we hear about government departments and elections being hacked by players who are often proxies of governments. Russia and China seem to be the main culprits here. Can you lay out the process and the reasoning behind this activity?
Well, the reasoning is fairly simple. You either want to get access to data that will help either your intelligence or your businesses. That means looking for data that can be used to gather more data, create contacts, help to foster agents in your enemies' inner circles, or you're looking for say patents, data on business dealings that can give your own companies a leg up when it comes to dealing with the companies from the opposing sides. So that's basically the two main areas of operation. Plus, there's the third one that's closely connected to the data acquisition programs, and that's information operations, meaning disinformation, meaning false flag operations, meaning spreading of fake news and trying to influence, say, elections in a country that you're not particularly fond of. So there's a bunch of reasons why countries engage in cyber espionage. And it has to be said that the techniques for cyber espionage have developed greatly over the last 10 or 15 years. We've gone from extremely primitive measures where basically we only had spies posting on forums trying to convince people to their government's point of view. We've gone all the way to massive hacker organizations employed by governments using cyber tools to do physical damage to critical infrastructure of their opponents. And that is where we are right now. And everybody's focused on trying to prevent those sorts of malicious infrastructure attacks that might cause actual physical damage. We're not talking about data anymore. We're not talking about bits and pixels. We're talking about things blowing up and people being cold in the middle of the winter because somebody switched off all of the heating and all of the electricity in the city. That's something that's happened, by the way, happened twice already in Ukraine. And that's, well, we've seen Ukraine become basically a playground for all sorts of hacker groups over the last decade or so. And we've seen a lot of very worrying techniques even before the actual invasion started in 2022. We've seen Ukraine become something of a testing ground for various techniques of cyber sabotage, cyber terrorism, and not just by Russia. Basically, everybody who has any sort of a stake in cyber operations has used Ukraine to test their weapons.
Right. Okay. That's. I want to come back to the attacks which actually have physical ramifications, but before we move to that, I'd like your thoughts on the political. You mentioned the dissemination of disinformation, for example. How does that work? And do we see a spike just before an election? I mean, we've got the European parliamentary elections, the US elections, and the UK elections, to mention a few, just this year. How does that work?
There's a lot of techniques and a lot of players involved in every disinformation campaign that we observe. Players, because it's not just a game of East versus West. It's not just a game of, the EU and the USA versus Russia and China. In the EU, we've seen disinformation operations by Turkey, by Iran, by the United Arab Emirates, by India. Basically, there was a report by the Oxford Internet Institute in 2021 that said that out of 130 countries in the UN, 83 use social media for propaganda purposes and for disinformation purposes. So it's really an extremely widespread phenomenon. A lot of governments, most governments, see social media, see online propaganda, online disinformation as their chance to promote their point of view, to promote their agenda. But obviously, here in Europe, the players that we are worried about the most are China and Russia. And according to the reports that I've seen, Russia is responsible for about 90% of all information operations in Western Europe, in the European Union. And Russia's objectives are fairly straightforward. It appears to want to keep Europe fragmented, to keep Europe disunified, and to do that, especially in the last year and a half, Russian operatives have really improved the tactics. They have turned to a lot more granular level of propaganda, so that every single country is being targeted on a far more personalized level. So that, say, a voter in Spain gets the exact reasons of why a Spanish person should not support any more help for Ukraine, or I don't know, should not support any further unification of the European Union, for that matter. The goals of those Russian campaigns are twofold. First of all, you have the tactical. You have the attempts to sort of sow discord among the European Union countries when it comes to help for Ukraine. That's the direct and the immediate effect that those campaigns are attempting to achieve. But you also see, and that's not just the case in the European Union, you also see attempts to weaken social cohesion in Western countries. That sounds like sociology talk, but it simply means that people stop trusting one another, stop trusting their institutions. And that means that people stop voting, people stop caring about who wins the elections in the countries. People start showing up to the social institutions. People stop creating institutions for citizen society, and that is important to those propaganda campaigns, simply because they mean to weaken the resolve of countries opposing whoever runs those campaigns. Currently, it's mainly Russia. And the best way to do that is to make sure that people just don't care. People just don't get involved. People think that everybody's just as bad as the next guy. That Russia might not be great, Russia might not be perfect, but nobody is.
Right.
That creates apathy. That creates disenchantment, disillusionment, and it simply means that Europeans don't really get involved in politics anymore.
Yes, I mean, have you seen any reflection of these characteristics in Poland?
I mean, certainly. One golden rule of propaganda, of disinformation, is that you can't really create issues out of thin air. What you do is you try to take an issue that is already there and blow it out of proportion. And you certainly can see Russian propaganda outlets being extremely engaged and interested in, for instance, the farmer protests that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, couple of months, simply because those tend to be, in a way, targeted at Ukraine, which is obviously connected to Russian interests. I'm not saying that farmers do not have actual grievances that need to be addressed. I'm just saying that it is in these propaganda outlets' best interest to take those grievances and just run with them.
Right.
Blow them out of proportion, make them more important than they ever were by using both the traditional media outlets and things like bots, things like fake social media accounts that are very effectively used to create an impression that any given problem is getting far more media and social traction than it actually is. It's astroturfing to the nth degree, basically.
Understood. Understood. Well, I'd love to continue this conversation with you, Wojciech. Unfortunately, we have to stop there. But thank you very much for coming along and sharing your expertise with our audience. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much.